Wait, you signed my paychecks. The words fell from Richard Collins' lips in a frightened whisper, but somehow they echoed louder than the music filling the ballroom. A second earlier, everyone had been laughing. Champagne glasses were raised. Someone had even clapped after my new daughter-in-law pointed at me and announced to her wealthy family, "This is the pathetic mother-in-law I've had to put up with." Laughter swept across the room like a gust of wind. Then Richard Collins, her father, looked directly into my face. His smile vanished. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand began trembling around his champagne flute. "Wait," he repeated, staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. "You signed my paychecks." Every laugh stopped. Even the band hesitated. For a long, painful moment, all eyes turned toward me. I simply smiled. "Good evening, Richard. My name is Margaret Hayes, and until that evening everyone believed I was nothing more than an ordinary 62-year-old widow, with modest clothes, sensible shoes, and an old SUV parked outside. That assumption never bothered me. In fact, I'd spent years encouraging it. Not because I enjoyed hiding anything, because I believed people revealed their true character when they thought you had nothing they needed. That night I learned just how true that was. 3 hours earlier, I had stood outside the Grand Lakes Ballroom in downtown Chicago, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy blue dress before stepping inside. The June air was warm and the hotel gardens looked beautiful. White roses lined the entrance. A string quartet played softly beneath a covered terrace. Guests laughed while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. It was exactly the wedding my son had dreamed about, and exactly the wedding I had quietly paid for. No one knew that except Daniel. Even then, he'd insisted we keep it private. "Mom," he'd told me months earlier, "Vanessa's family already thinks they have to impress everyone. I don't want money becoming part of the conversation." I had smiled. "It never has to." He hugged me. "I'll pay you back someday." I kissed his forehead. "No, sweetheart, just build a happy marriage." At least that had been my hope. The ballroom itself looked like something from a magazine. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. Tall floral arrangements stood on every table. The menu included filet mignon lobster tails, imported wines, and desserts that looked almost too pretty to eat. I remembered signing the final payment authorization only 2 weeks before. Almost $80,000, worth every penny, I thought. A mother only watched her only child get married once. As I entered, Daniel spotted me almost immediately. "There she is." He hurried over, wrapped me in a hug, and whispered, "You look beautiful." I laughed softly. "That's what sons are supposed to say." "I mean it." He looked nervous. Not wedding day nervous, different. Like someone trying very hard to keep everyone happy. I squeezed his arm. "You okay?" He forced a smile. "I will be." I noticed him glance toward another group across the room. Vanessa's family. Elegant. Expensive. Confident. The Collins family had built their reputation over generations. Private schools, country clubs, vacation homes. Their conversations naturally drifted toward investment portfolios, ski trips in Colorado, and grandchildren already enrolled in prestigious prep schools. I didn't resent any of it. Success wasn't something to apologize for. What mattered was how success changed people, or didn't. Vanessa looked stunning in her wedding gown. She truly did. She greeted guests with perfect posture and flawless makeup. Everything about her looked polished. When she finally walked over, she kissed Daniel before offering me a quick, practiced smile. "Margaret." "Congratulations," I said warmly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Her smile disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. "My family's over there." She nodded toward a large group gathered around the bar. "They've been asking about you." "How nice." "They're excited to finally meet Daniel's side." Something about the pause felt odd. Still, I followed. Perhaps she was simply nervous. Weddings could overwhelm anyone. As we approached, conversations paused. Vanessa began introducing everyone. "My Aunt Linda. My cousin Michelle. My Uncle Greg." Several people shook my hand politely. Others barely acknowledged me. One woman looked briefly at my dress before returning to her wine. I had worn that dress for nearly 8 years. It fit well. It was comfortable. I never imagined clothing said much about a person's heart. Apparently, not everyone agreed. Richard Collins wasn't with the group yet. Someone mentioned he was speaking with business associates near the dance floor. Vanessa continued smiling. Then she wrapped one arm around Daniel. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rose just enough to gather everyone's attention. "I'd like you all to meet my mother-in-law." I smiled. Several relatives turned toward me. Vanessa laughed. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. "This is the pathetic mother-in-law I've had to put up with." For half a heartbeat, silence. Then laughter exploded around me. Not polite chuckles. Real laughter. One uncle nearly spilled his drink. Someone actually slapped the table. An older woman covered her mouth while giggling. "Oh, Vanessa. You're terrible." "That's hilarious." Vanessa shrugged dramatically. "What?" She looked directly at me. "I'm only telling the truth." More laughter. She continued. "You should have seen the tiny little house Daniel grew up in." A cousin snorted. Vanessa kept going. "And she still drives that old SUV?" Someone asked. "Really?" Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. "I honestly thought she'd upgrade before the wedding." Another round of laughter. I looked toward Daniel. His smile had completely disappeared. "Vanessa." He spoke quietly. "Enough." She waved him off. "Oh, relax." She turned back toward her family. "I've had to spend months convincing her that people actually dress up for formal events." Another laugh. "I mean," she glanced at my dress. I guess she tried. The room erupted again. I could have defended myself. I could have reminded everyone who had paid for the ballroom they were standing in. Who had covered the flowers? The orchestra? The catering? The honeymoon? Instead, I simply folded my hands together. My mother used to tell me, "Margaret, dignity is the one thing nobody can take from you unless you hand it over." So I stood there quietly. I wasn't embarrassed. I was disappointed, mostly for Daniel. Then I noticed someone approaching behind the crowd. Richard Collins. He smiled politely while carrying a champagne glass. "What's everyone laughing about?" Vanessa beamed. "Dad, perfect timing." She pointed directly at me. "I was just introducing Daniel's mother." Richard looked at me. His smile froze. His eyes widened. His grip tightened around the stem of his glass. He stared for several seconds, long enough that the laughter slowly faded. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he asked, "Wait." His face turned completely pale. "The Margaret Hayes." I nodded. "Good evening, Richard." His champagne glass trembled. Then he quietly said the words that left the entire ballroom speechless. "Wait. You signed my paychecks?" No one spoke. The ballroom, which had been buzzing with laughter only seconds earlier, fell so quiet I could hear the ice melting inside someone's forgotten champagne glass. Richard Collins stared at me as though he'd suddenly remembered something he'd spent years trying not to forget. His daughter looked from him to me completely confused. "Dad!" Richard didn't answer. Instead, he set his champagne flute on the nearest table before his trembling hand could drop it. He said quietly. "Mrs. Hayes, I had no idea." I smiled gently. "That's understandable." Vanessa frowned. "What is going on?" Richard swallowed. "You know her?" I answered before he could. "Mr. Collins and I have met several times over the years." Vanessa laughed nervously. "Oh, business somewhere." Richard looked at her. "No." Then he corrected himself. "Yes, business." He paused. "A great deal of business." Nobody understood. I could see it on every face surrounding us. Only Richard knew exactly why his heart was pounding. Because every January, every April, every October, he sat across from me inside a quiet boardroom 23 floors above Michigan Avenue. He presented quarterly reports. I approved budgets. He managed the company. I owned it. Vanessa forced another laugh. "Dad, seriously." She nudged his shoulder. "Stop joking." "I'm not joking." She looked at me, then back at him. "You can't possibly mean—" Richard slowly nodded. "This is Mrs. Margaret Hayes." He almost whispered my name. "Our chairwoman." The room remained silent. Then someone chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, come on." Another relative smiled uncertainly. "Good one." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Okay, enough." She folded her arms. "This isn't funny anymore." Richard didn't smile. Not even a little. Instead, he looked directly at me. "I'm terribly sorry." His apology was sincere. Deeply sincere. I shook my head. "Richard, tonight isn't about business." "No." "It's about my son's wedding." His shoulders relaxed slightly. He understood what I meant. I wasn't there as his employer. I was there as Daniel's mother. Nothing more. Nothing less. Unfortunately, not everyone else understood that distinction. "Dad." Vanessa's voice became sharper. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" Richard hesitated, then quietly said, "You owe Mrs. Hayes an apology." Vanessa blinked. "I owe her—" "Yes." She laughed again. "But why—" Richard glanced toward the guests still watching us. This isn't the place. It became the place when she embarrassed me. His face tightened. No, Vanessa. You embarrassed yourself. The words landed much harder than he intended. Her smile vanished. So you're taking her side? There are no sides. There certainly are. She looked around the room as though asking everyone to support her. This woman has spent months making Daniel feel guilty about money. Daniel immediately spoke. That's not true. Vanessa ignored him. She never contributes anything. I quietly looked at Daniel. He lowered his eyes. He knew that statement wasn't true. He also knew why I wasn't correcting her. Not yet. Someone from the band quietly resumed soft music. Conversation slowly returned around us. People pretended not to watch, but they watched. Every single one of them. Richard turned toward me. Would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I smiled. I don't think that's necessary. I insist. Before I could answer, Daniel stepped closer. Mom, it's all right. We walked together toward a quieter hallway outside the ballroom. Large windows overlooked Lake Michigan. The city lights shimmered against the water. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Richard sighed. I cannot apologize enough. You don't owe me an apology. I should have stopped her. You weren't there. I should have raised my daughter better. That sentence hurt him to say. I could hear it. Parents carried their children's failures differently. They always blamed themselves first. I know she's spoiled, he admitted. My wife and I gave her too much. I smiled softly. We all make mistakes as parents. His eyes drifted toward the ballroom. She has no idea who you are? I prefer it that way. Richard looked genuinely puzzled. I've wondered for years why you never allowed your photograph in our annual reports. I never liked publicity. But your employees don't even recognize you. They don't need to. He shook his head. Most owners would want everyone to know. I laughed quietly. I spent 30 years married to a man who believed respect had to be earned. My husband never cared about titles. He cared about character. Richard nodded slowly. I remember him. So do I. For a moment we simply looked out across the lake. Then he asked the question I'd expected eventually. Does Daniel know? Some. He knows I invested wisely after my husband passed. But not. No. He doesn't know I'm majority owner. Richard looked astonished. Why? I smiled. Because I wanted to know whether my son loved me. I paused. Or my money. Richard frowned. Surely you never doubted that. I never doubted Daniel. I looked back toward the ballroom. I doubted what money does to people. He quietly nodded. I understand. I've seen board members change after bonuses. I've seen families torn apart over inheritances. So have I. That's why I stayed invisible. Richard suddenly chuckled. I remember your first board meeting after your husband died. I was terrified. So was everyone else. Were they? They expected someone cold. Demanding. He smiled. Instead, you spent the first hour asking about everyone's families. I laughed. I've always believed people work better when someone knows their grandchildren's names. They'd follow you anywhere. I don't need followers. I need honest people. He looked down. I'm afraid my daughter hasn't learned that lesson. Not yet. Oh, inside the ballroom I could hear laughter beginning again. The reception was trying to recover. Richard sighed. I'll speak to Vanessa. I gently touched his arm. No. He looked surprised. This isn't the night. But if she apologizes because her father tells her to, I shook my head. It won't mean anything. He understood immediately. You want it to come from her. Exactly. And if it never does, I smiled sadly, then I'll know exactly who she is. He nodded. I owe you something else. What? The truth. He looked almost embarrassed. When you approved my promotion to CEO 5 years ago? Yes. I promised myself I'd never disappoint you. You haven't. I hope that's still true after tonight. It is. His eyes watered slightly. Thank you. We started walking back toward the ballroom. Neither of us noticed that someone had been standing just inside the hallway entrance. Daniel. He hadn't heard everything, but he'd heard enough. He looked from Richard to me. His forehead creased with confusion. Mom. His voice was barely above a whisper. What exactly is he talking about? I realized the moment I'd spent years postponing had finally arrived. Mom. Daniel looked at me with the same expression he wore as a little boy whenever he sensed something wasn't quite right. What exactly is he talking about? For a brief moment, I considered telling him we would discuss it another day. After all, this was supposed to be the happiest evening of his life. But life has a strange way of choosing its own timing. Richard glanced at me. I'll leave you two alone. No, I said gently. You don't have to. Daniel looked between us. Somebody please tell me what's going on. His voice wasn't angry. It was confused. Deeply confused. I took a slow breath. Let's sit down. The three of us moved to a quiet seating area near the ballroom entrance where the music sounded distant enough for a private conversation. Daniel sat forward, elbows resting on his knees. I've never seen anyone look at you the way Mr. Collins just did. Richard corrected him softly. Please call me Richard? Daniel nodded absent-mindedly. Okay, Richard. He turned back to me. So, I folded my hands together. You remember when your father passed away? Daniel's expression softened immediately. I remember everything. You were 28, he nodded. You just started your engineering job. And Dad still worried about me more than himself. I smiled sadly. That sounds like him. For a few moments neither of us spoke. Even after 12 years, mentioning my husband's name still carried a quiet ache. His absence had become part of my life, not a wound anymore. More like a scar that never disappeared. Your father never talked much about work at home, I began. You know that. Daniel smiled faintly. He always said home was for family. Exactly. He wanted you to know him as your father. Not as a businessman. Daniel nodded. I always thought he owned a small manufacturing company. He did. A very good one. But after he passed away, I paused. Things changed. Richard quietly added. Mrs. Hayes became responsible for everything. Daniel looked surprised. You ran the company. I owned most of it. His eyebrows lifted. For how long? 12 years. He blinked several times. 12? He leaned back in disbelief. You've owned a manufacturing company for 12 years. I nodded. Richard quietly clarified. Not just a company. He looked at Daniel carefully. Hayes Industrial Systems. Daniel frowned. I've heard of that. I should hope so, Richard said with a tired smile. It's one of the largest precision equipment manufacturers in the Midwest. Daniel slowly looked back toward me. You. I simply nodded. Yes. He laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because it felt impossible. No. He shook his head. No, Mom. You still grocery shop with coupons. I enjoy coupons. You drive a 10-year-old SUV. It still runs beautifully. You mow your own lawn. I find it relaxing. He stared at me. I don't understand. You don't have to understand everything tonight. But, he rubbed both hands across his face. I know. I thought you lived on Dad's pension. I've heard that assumption before. You never corrected me. No. Why? I smiled gently. Because you never asked. Daniel sat in silence for nearly a minute. The sounds of laughter floated out from the ballroom. Life continued inside. But ours had stopped. Finally, he looked up. Did you pay for this wedding? I answered honestly. Yes. The whole thing? Yes. He stared at the carpet. I told Vanessa I had savings. I know. You let me take the credit. I did. Why? Because I wasn't buying a wedding. I smiled. I was giving my son a gift. His eyes began filling with tears. You should have told me. I wanted your marriage to begin with gratitude. Not obligation, he whispered. I don't deserve you. I reached across and squeezed his hand. Don't ever say that. Before either of us could continue, the ballroom doors swung open. Vanessa stormed into the hallway. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. There you are. She looked irritated. Everyone's waiting. Then she noticed our faces. What happened? Daniel stood. We're talking. So talk later. She looked directly at Richard. Dad, tell them to come back inside. Richard didn't move. Vanessa. What? I think you owe Margaret an apology. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, not this again. Richard's voice remained calm. I'm serious. So am I. She folded her arms. I don't know why everybody's acting like she's royalty. Nobody answered. That irritated her even more. She pointed toward me. She embarrassed me in front of my family. I quietly replied. I didn't say a word. You didn't have to. She looked at Richard. You acted like she was some kind of celebrity. Richard took a deep breath. Because she's the chairwoman of Hayes Industrial Systems. Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. Then looked around as though waiting for everyone else to join her. Nobody did. She frowned. Dad. I'm serious. No. She shook her head. No, you're not. She turned toward me. This is ridiculous. I remained seated. She took another step closer. So what's next? You own half of Chicago. No, I own one company. She smirked. Sure, Richard spoke firmly. I've attended board meetings with Mrs. Hayes for 5 years. Vanessa looked annoyed. So I report to her. No, you don't. I do. No, she laughed again. You're the CEO. Exactly. And CEOs don't report to little old ladies living in brick ranch houses. Richard's expression hardened. They report to owners. The hallway had become quiet again. Several wedding guests had wandered over, pretending to admire paintings while clearly listening to every word. Vanessa noticed them. She lowered her voice slightly. I don't believe any of this. You don't have to, Richard answered. It's still true. She looked at me. If you're really so rich. She glanced deliberately at my dress. Why do you look like this? I smiled. Like what? You know? No, she sighed dramatically. Ordinary. I couldn't help smiling. I am ordinary. No, you're pretending. I've never pretended to be anything. You let everyone think you were poor. I never told anyone I was. Same difference. I slowly stood. Our eyes met. Vanessa. My husband and I built a business. We worked 70-hour weeks. We missed vacations. We refinanced our home twice. We worried about payroll before we worried about ourselves. I paused. When success finally came, we didn't forget who we had been. She looked away. I continued softly. I wear comfortable clothes because they make me comfortable. I drive an old vehicle because I like it. I live in the same house because that's where my happiest memories are. I smiled. If those things make me look poor, I can live with that. Daniel suddenly spoke. His voice was stronger than it had been all evening. Vanessa, she turned. You owe my mother an apology. Her eyes widened. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of what's right. She looked genuinely offended. You actually believe this story? Daniel looked directly at Richard. Richard answered immediately. I've signed documents approved by your mother dozens of times. Daniel slowly nodded. Then he looked back at Vanessa. I believe them. For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty replace confidence in Vanessa's face, but instead of apologizing, she became defensive. If this is true, she crossed her arms, then she tricked all of us. I quietly realized something important. She wasn't embarrassed by what she'd said. She was embarrassed she'd said it to the wrong person. And there is a world of difference between those two things. Vanessa's words lingered in the hallway. If this is true, then she tricked all of us. For a moment, nobody responded. Richard slowly closed his eyes. I recognized that expression. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The kind only a parent could feel. The kind that settled into your heart when you realized your child still had lessons life would have to teach the hard way. Daniel stared at his new wife as though he barely recognized her. Vanessa, he said quietly, listen to yourself. She folded her arms tighter. No, you listen. She pointed toward me. She knew everyone thought she was broke. I never said I was, but you let people believe it. I let people believe whatever they chose. That's manipulation. I smiled sadly. No, it's observation. She frowned. What does that even mean? It means people often tell you who they are before you ever ask. Richard sighed. Margaret, I think that's enough. I nodded. It is. I had no desire to embarrass Vanessa any further. Nothing good ever came from humiliating someone who was already losing face. I simply wanted to go home. I'll be leaving now. Daniel looked startled. Mom, you can't leave. The reception just started. I smiled. I've been here for the important part. His eyes filled with regret. No, you haven't. I haven't even danced with you. I reached up and adjusted his tie the way I had done since he was a little boy. You'll always be my little boy. But tonight, I smiled warmly. You're somebody's husband. Go be with your bride. He looked miserable. I don't want you leaving like this. I'll be all right. Vanessa suddenly spoke. So you're just walking away? I turned toward her. Yes. She looked almost offended. That's it. What else would you like me to do? I don't know. Say something. I thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. I've spent 62 years learning that not every insult deserves a response. She had no reply. Richard stepped beside me. I'll walk you out. You don't need to. I'd like to. We quietly made our way toward the ballroom entrance. Behind us, conversation slowly resumed. People whispered. I caught fragments. She owns the company. All this time. Did you hear what Vanessa said? Word travels faster than music at a wedding. By tomorrow morning, every guest would remember the reception for reasons that had nothing to do with the vows. As we reached the lobby, Richard stopped. I'm ashamed. Please don't be. I've spent 30 years teaching employees about respect. He shook his head. Apparently, I forgot to teach it at home. You taught it. He looked confused. Whether someone learns it, I smiled gently, is another matter. He nodded slowly. I appreciate your kindness. I didn't feel very kind. You could have destroyed her. I laughed softly. How? One phone call. You own the company. You could have fired me. I don't fire people because of family disagreements. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why everyone respects you. I looked toward the parking lot. The respect that matters most is my son's. Daniel caught up with us before I reached my SUV. Mom, he was almost out of breath. I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology. I do. No. I should have stopped her. I looked into his eyes. Yes, I should have. I froze. I know. I kept thinking she'd realize she'd gone too far. But she didn't. No. He looked down. I failed you. Those words hurt far more than anything Vanessa had said. I stepped closer and placed both hands on his shoulders. Daniel, he looked up. Do you remember when you were 10 years old? He nodded. You stood up to a boy who was teasing another child at school. A faint smile crossed his face. Tommy. That's right. You came home with a black eye. You told me courage sometimes hurts. I did. I forgot. No. You hesitated. There's a difference. His voice broke. I don't want today to be the memory you carry from my wedding. It won't. What will... I smiled. That you came after me. He hugged me tightly, longer than he had hugged me in years. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know. Back inside the ballroom, things were unraveling. Later, several guests told me exactly what happened. Vanessa returned to the reception expecting everyone to move on. Instead, the room felt different. Conversations stopped whenever she approached. Some relatives quietly excused themselves. Others pretended to check their phones. Even people who hadn't heard the entire exchange sensed something uncomfortable had happened. Then Richard walked back inside. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood beside the microphone the wedding planner had prepared for toasts. Ladies and gentlemen, the room quieted. I'd like to say something. Vanessa smiled nervously. Perhaps she thought he intended to smooth everything over. Instead, Richard looked directly at the guests. I owe someone an apology. He glanced toward the ballroom doors. My daughter's mother-in-law showed every one of us more grace tonight than most people are capable of showing. The room became silent. My daughter behaved in a manner that does not reflect the values my wife and I tried to teach. Vanessa's face went pale. Dad, he gently raised one hand. Please let me finish. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. There is nothing wrong with success. There is nothing wrong with wealth. But there is something terribly wrong with believing either gives us permission to look down on another human being. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Richard took a slow breath. The woman my daughter insulted built a company that provides thousands of families with honest work. More importantly, she showed kindness when she had every reason not to. He stepped away from the microphone. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't celebratory. It was respectful, quiet, earnest. Vanessa stood completely still. For the first time all evening, she realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about character. And character couldn't be bought. Fine. The following morning, my phone rang just after 9. It was Richard. I thought you should know. What? Vanessa hasn't stopped crying. I closed my eyes. I don't take pleasure in hearing that. I know. He hesitated. She's angry. At me? No. At herself? I wish. I frowned. Then who? She says Daniel chose you over her. I looked out my kitchen window at the bird feeder my late husband had built years ago. A pair of cardinals landed together. I hope someday she understands. Understands what? That this was never a choice between a wife and a mother. It was a choice. I paused. Between pride and decency. Richard was quiet for several seconds. Then he sighed. I think they're heading for their first real fight as husband and wife. I had a feeling. It wouldn't be their last. The honeymoon lasted 6 days. The silence afterward lasted nearly 3 weeks. I didn't call Daniel. He didn't call me. Not because either of us was angry, Sometimes people need a little distance before they can hear their own conscience. Every morning I watered the flowers my late husband had planted years ago. Every afternoon I answered emails from the company. Every evening I ate dinner on my back porch, listening to the cicadas and watching the sun disappear behind the maple trees. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm. And honestly, I was grateful for that. After the wedding, I wanted ordinary more than ever. One Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, Daniel stood there holding a paper grocery bag. He looked exhausted. His shoulders sagged. His eyes carried the weight of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "I brought your favorite apple fritters," I smiled. "From Miller's Bakery." He nodded. "I got there before they sold out." I stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The familiar smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as I poured 2 cups. Daniel looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The same oak dining table. The same family photographs. The same quilt folded over the living room sofa. "This house always feels peaceful," he said quietly. "It always has." He smiled faintly. "Dad would have loved today. I've thought that many times." For a while, we simply drank coffee. Neither of us seemed eager to begin the difficult conversation. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I've replayed that wedding 100 times." "I imagine you have. I keep wishing I'd spoken sooner." I looked at him kindly. "You can't rewrite yesterday." "I know. But I can apologize." He reached across the table and gently took my hand. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't protect you." Tears filled his eyes. "I saw what she was doing. I knew it was wrong. And I froze. I kept thinking she'd stop. I kept hoping she'd realize everyone was uncomfortable. But she just kept going." His voice cracked. "And I let it happen." I squeezed his hand. "I've already forgiven you." "You shouldn't have to." "Perhaps. But forgiveness isn't something people earn. It's something we choose." He wiped his eyes. "I don't deserve a mother like you." I smiled. "I've heard you say that before. And it wasn't true then either." He looked around the kitchen. "I understand now. Why you never talked about money?" I laughed softly. "Money is useful. It's just not interesting." He smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Only you would say something like that." "It's true." "I've spent years in board meetings. You know what wealthy people usually discuss?" He shrugged. "Making more money?" "Exactly. And after about 15 minutes, it becomes terribly boring." We both laughed. The tension between us eased. Then Daniel asked the question I'd been expecting. "Why didn't you ever tell me you owned the company?" I leaned back in my chair. "Because I wanted you to build your own life." "You would have anyway." "Maybe. But I never wanted anyone to wonder whether your success belonged to you. Or to your mother's influence." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand." "I also wanted to know something." "What? If I ever lost everything?" I smiled gently. "Would my son still love me?" He looked almost offended. "You know I would. I do now." A week later, another visitor arrived. Richard Collins. He stood on my porch carrying a small box of chocolates. I wasn't sure what to bring. "You didn't have to bring anything," my wife insisted. I laughed. "Then I'd better thank her." We settled onto the back patio overlooking the garden. Richard looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Things aren't good." "With Vanessa?" He nodded. "She's embarrassed. That can be a beginning." "I hope so." He sighed deeply. "She finally admitted something." "What?" "She wasn't angry because she insulted you." He looked ashamed. "She was angry because she insulted someone important." I nodded quietly. "I suspected as much." He looked at me carefully. "Does that bother you?" "It saddens me." "There's a difference." Richard stared into his coffee cup. "I've spent years teaching managers that every employee deserves respect. I never imagined my own daughter hadn't learned the same lesson." "Sometimes children hear our words." I smiled softly. "But they imitate our actions." He looked troubled. "I've wondered where we failed." "You may not have." "What do you mean?" "Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived." Richard hesitated before asking his next question. "I've been worried." "About your job." He nodded. "I know you would never threaten me, but I also know board members might question whether this creates a conflict." I smiled reassuringly. "The board already knows." His eyes widened. "They do. They've known since the morning after the wedding." His shoulders tensed. "And?" "They asked one question." "What was it?" "Has Richard Collins done his job well?" He looked nervous. "And I answered yes. He exhaled slowly. They asked a second question. His face grew serious. What? Has he ever abused his authority or acted dishonestly? I said no. Richard's eyes became moist. And that was the end of the discussion. You protected me. No. I shook my head. I treated you fairly. You earned your position. My daughter didn't. I smiled. The sins of children aren't automatically inherited by their parents. He laughed quietly. I wish more people believed that. Another week passed. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Vanessa Hayes. I answered. Hello. For several seconds. Silence. Then I heard a soft voice. Margaret? Yes. It's Vanessa. I know. Another pause. I was wondering. She struggled to finish the sentence. Would you meet me? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I wanted to hear whether she had truly thought about what had happened. Finally, I asked. Why? She took a shaky breath. Because I've spent 2 weeks blaming everyone else. My father. Daniel. You. My grandparents. My friends. My upbringing. She stopped. Then quietly said, and yesterday. I looked in the mirror. I remained silent. She continued. I realized something. What? If you'd actually been poor, I would have still said those things. Her voice broke. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. For the first time since the wedding, I believed I was hearing the real Vanessa, not the polished socialite, not the woman desperate to impress her wealthy relatives, just a young woman finally confronting the person she'd become. I'd like to apologize, she whispered. Not because you're wealthy, because I forgot how to be kind. I looked out the kitchen window. The afternoon sun lit the garden my husband had loved so much. Perhaps this was the beginning we'd all been hoping for. I'll meet you, I said gently. Tomorrow morning. There is a small diner near Lincoln Park. I know it. I'll be there. After I hung up, I smiled to myself. Real change rarely arrives with applause. It usually begins with one honest conversation. The following Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of gentle sunshine that made Chicago feel almost like a small town. I reached the little diner near Lincoln Park 10 minutes early. It wasn't fancy. Just red vinyl booths, fresh coffee, homemade pies, and waitresses who still called everyone on. It reminded me of the places my husband and I used to visit when we were young and counting every dollar. I chose a booth near the window. A few minutes later, Vanessa walked through the front door. I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different physically, because she looked lighter. She wore blue jeans, a simple sweater, and no expensive jewelry. There was no carefully rehearsed smile. No air of superiority. Only nervousness. She spotted me and slowly walked over. Good morning. Good morning, Vanessa. She sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, the waitress poured coffee into our cups and quietly walked away. Vanessa wrapped both hands around the warm mug. I've practiced this conversation all week. I smiled gently. Life usually ignores rehearsals. She laughed softly. I've noticed. Then her smile disappeared. I'm sorry. The words came quietly, not dramatically. Not for attention. Just honestly. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for laughing. I'm sorry for making everyone else laugh. She lowered her eyes. But mostly, I'm sorry because I would have said those same things even if you had been exactly who I thought you were. I nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that. She looked surprised. That's all. What were you expecting? I don't know. Anger. A lecture. You have every right. I smiled. My husband used to tell me something. She looked up. What? He said that people learn very little while someone else is yelling. She gave a faint smile. He sounds like he was a wise man. He was. He also wasn't afraid to admit when he was wrong. Oh. Vanessa took a deep breath. I've been trying to understand why I acted that way. And I think she searched for the right words. I spent so many years worrying about how other people judged me that I started judging everyone else first. I listened quietly. My parents worked hard. My grandparents built their business. But somewhere along the way, I confused wealth with worth. She wiped away a tear. I honestly believed successful people deserved more respect than ordinary people. I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. Many people believe that. They just don't say it out loud. She nodded. I did. And hearing those words come out of my own mouth, she shook her head. I don't like the woman I became. A few minutes later, Daniel walked into the diner. He looked uncertain. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I smiled. "You were invited." He slid into the booth beside Vanessa. For a few moments, none of us spoke. Then Daniel looked at both of us. "I owe both of you something." Vanessa looked at him. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." He turned toward me first. "Mom, I should have defended you before anyone else had the chance." "I'll regret that for the rest of my life." I gently shook my head. "No." "You'll remember it." "But regret only helps if it changes tomorrow." Then he looked at Vanessa. "And I should have talked honestly with you long before the wedding. I wanted everyone to like everyone, so I avoided difficult conversations." Vanessa squeezed his hand. I did the same thing. For the first time since their wedding, I saw them talking like partners instead of opponents. A month later, I invited both of them to dinner. Not because everything had been magically repaired. Healing doesn't happen that way. Trust grows slowly, like a garden. You water it. You protect it. You give it time. That evening, Daniel arrived carrying a peach pie. Vanessa carried a bowl of homemade potato salad. "I made it myself," she said nervously. "I hope it's edible." I laughed. "We'll survive." Dinner wasn't elegant. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie. The same meal I'd served my family for years. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Richard and his wife, Eleanor. Richard held up a bottle of sparkling cider. "I hope we're not too early." "You've never been early a day in your life," I teased. He laughed. "Fair enough." Soon the dining room filled with conversation. Stories replaced awkward silence. Laughter replaced embarrassment. At one point, Richard raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast." Everyone looked toward him. "To Margaret." He smiled warmly. "The strongest people I've ever met aren't the ones who can defeat others. They're the ones who can forgive them." I felt my cheeks grow warm. "You give me too much credit." "No." He shook his head. "I don't think I do." After dessert, Daniel helped me wash the dishes. As we stood side by side at the sink, he smiled. "You know." "What?" "This feels like home again." It never stopped being home. He dried a plate and looked at me. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," he laughed. "I don't want to inherit your company someday." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't." "I want to earn the opportunity." I looked at him carefully. "Your father would have been proud to hear that." He smiled. "I hope so. So am I." Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stepped onto the back porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A cool breeze moved through the trees my husband had planted decades earlier. I thought about everything that had happened. The wedding, the insults, the silence, the apologies, the healing. Then I realized something. The greatest inheritance I could ever leave my son wasn't a successful company. It wasn't money. It wasn't stock certificates or property deeds. It was an example, the example that dignity is stronger than pride, that forgiveness requires more courage than revenge, and that the true measure of a person's character is revealed by how they treat someone they believe has nothing to offer them. Money can build beautiful homes. It can create successful businesses. It can provide comfort, but it cannot buy humility. It cannot purchase kindness, and it certainly cannot replace love. Those things must be chosen every single day. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, or if it encouraged you to choose kindness over pride, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about family forgiveness and second chances, I'd be honored if you stayed with us for the next one. Thank you for listening.